What do most people think is the best way to generate wealth? Well, I have some ideas as to what I think most people would answer or how most people would answer, but I certainly know how I would answer that question. I always thought the answer to that question was being an entrepreneur and starting your own business. It was kind of disappointing though, because I never really had any ideas for businesses to start. I had some friends and they knew I was kind of business oriented, so they'd talk to me about this, and it'd be like every time I met up with them, like, Nick, oh, I got this great idea for this new business. And I mean, come on, let's be honest. Probably 50% of them were trash, or maybe not trash, but they were good ideas, but I just didn't see how you could turn it into a business. But there were definitely some ideas out there that were great. And it was kind of disappointing because even after hearing all these great ideas and seeing how he would, or the different people would come up with those, I still wasn't coming up with any of my own. And I thought, okay, well, if I can't start my own business, what am I going to do? The initial answer was, well, I'm just gonna try and be president or CEO of a big company. They'll pay me a lot of money and life will be good. Well, unfortunately, nobody really wanted to give me that responsibility. I was raising my hand and nobody was calling on me. What I realized is that, and I'm sure you've heard this before if you've watched any of my videos, I had to build the table, I had to build the seat if I was going to have that proverbial seat at the table. What I realized is that there is a different type of entrepreneurism called entrepreneurship through acquisition, and that flavor of entrepreneurism is really what resonated with me. 10 years ago, launched 4 Pillars, and ever since I've been buying businesses. A lot of people think that it takes a ton of money out of pocket to buy a business, or in other words, that if you want to buy a business, you already have to be rich, and if you're not rich, you can't, and if you are rich, then you shouldn't really be worried about too many things because, hey, you're already rich. That's not really the case. Now, I will say that in watching videos and whatnot, there is a lot of commentary about buying businesses with no cash out of pocket. And I am not going to completely bash those because it absolutely is possible. As an example, our 9th deal, which we hope to close at the end of this month, actually is gonna be no cash out of pocket. Now, that's not to say it's without risk. That's not to say that we're not putting skin in the game in other ways, but in terms of actual cash coming out of the pocket, 0. So is it possible? Absolutely it's possible. Do you have to find sellers in distress? Not at all. It's a combination of a good business, a good relationship with the seller, not just a good relationship with the seller, a reasonable seller plus a good relationship with the seller, and then the right lender. All 3 of those stars have to align in order to make this happen. If all 3 of those don't align, is it possible? Sure, but it's just going to be a little bit harder. What's one example? Well, there have been companies that I've evaluated over the years that really the only way for a transaction to occur is for it to be 100% seller finance. There might be significant customer concentration issues, or there might be very significant volatility in earnings and revenue that if a lender looks at it, they will just say, no, the volatility is too great, we're not going to lend you any money, and you would either have to come out of pocket or go the seller financing route. When you're evaluating a business, if the business owner hasn't really had any talks with buyers yet, then they're probably going to have some huge number. And if their business has, let's stick with customer concentration for this example, they're just not going to be able to sell. And that kind of sucks as the buyer because you're the one that has to deliver that bad news. And you know what? That buyer is probably not going to work out with that buyer, at least not right now. Definitely somebody you should stay in contact with, because if there are those severe issues, you're reading it correctly, then they're going to get similar feedback from other buyers. Really though, as I think about this, if you're pursuing an acquisition and you need it to be no cash out of pocket, then the main thing is just you got to be patient and you have to approach it with a long-term perspective, not a short-term perspective. I would never expect to be able to buy a business very quickly if I had 0 cash out of pocket. The quicker I think I could get a deal done would be correlated with a higher cash out of pocket. So for example, if I'm buying a $5 million business, I think I could buy that very quickly if I write a $5 million check. Well, unfortunately, I don't have a $5 million check, so I can't close on this business almost immediately. If I had $2.5 million, I think I could probably go out and get a loan very quickly as well. But do you know what? I can't stroke a $2.5 million check. On a business of $5 million, where I think the sweet spot in terms of cash out of pocket for a deal like that, I would say is $100,000 to $500,000. Those are still pretty big numbers. That's not to mean I am trying to, do clickbait, where it's like how to buy a business for no money down, and I say, oh no, really, you do have to put money down. I'm not trying to say that at all. I'm just saying that that's the sweet spot for a $5 million transaction. Now, if you want to buy a business for $5 million with no cash out of pocket, I think what you would need to do is you could have a meaningful piece of senior debt, maybe let's call it $2 million, with $3 million being in the form of seller financing. Now, some banks will still require you to come a little bit out of pocket. Here's where you're going to have more success finding lenders that are open to a no cash out of pocket scenario. So definitely still possible. It's just not only do you have to find the right deal, you have to find the right lenders. As I think about transactions, as I think about doing more deals, I certainly have a desire to minimize how much cash I put out of pocket. So this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. For businesses that I think are more attractive, I'm willing to come out of pocket more. For businesses that I think are riskier, not so much. It's a trade-off, but this is just one of the many trade-offs that you will encounter as you're trying to buy a business. I've built a whole course on how to buy a business. In that course, I talk about sourcing. I talk about how to finance the deal, what we're talking about here. I talk about how to model the deal in Excel. I talk about how to have relationships with sellers, with lenders. Really, soup to nuts, how to buy a business. Financing is one piece, but so is what industry you want to go after. So is if you're going to be geographically constrained. Buying a business is not easy. It does not happen overnight, but it still is, for me, the most exciting and the most likely for success path that I personally could take in order to generate wealth. If you would like to learn more about buying a business, even just to get a little bit more information about how I've done it or the companies that we've bought, check out the course website. It's nick4pillars.com. If you read through that and you have more interest, I encourage you to book a call. Regardless, I hope you've enjoyed this commentary on how it is, in fact, possible to buy a business with no money down, and encourage you to keep exploring buying businesses, especially if you want to check out my website. Thanks again for watching.